Welcome everyone on the call, online and here in the meeting. I have very formal notes, but I just decided not to use them to make this a little more interesting. So for me, it's a really great pleasure to be here to moderate this, to have a discussion between the 10-member group of high-level representatives and the authors and colleagues and friends in UNCTAD, who every year produce a really fantastic report. The Technology Innovation Report, in my view, it is one of the best kept secrets among the UN flagship publications. You know, I would really encourage you, if you haven't done so, read the whole report. Even if you don't have a hard copy, read the online version. There's lots of interesting material there. And the topics selected, as you can see, are always very timely. This year, the focus is on opening green windows. So it's all really about the green economy, green technologies with its varying definitions, and especially in this context, frontier technologies. These new technologies and clusters of technologies and systems, for that matter, at the frontier of technological development. And this is a very big importance because we are really at a time of a technological revolution. If you look at numbers, last year, 2022, was really the first year where we had more investment in green energy technologies, clean energy transition technologies than in fossil fuels. This is really the first year this ever happened. And growth rates are enormous, but they're concentrated in very few countries. So it's a really important question. What does that mean for developing countries? What does it mean for also within some countries, some population groups who may or may not be able to reap the benefits of these very rapid developments. So that's why I think it's very timely, even as the international community talks about the poly crisis, you know, a crisis of fuel, food, finance under a changing climate, and related to this, of course, geopolitical conflicts. You know, these times sound very, very uncertain to many people around this world. So I think this is very, very timely. My friends at UNCTAD also said maybe I should start by introducing the 10-member group first. As you may know, because you're here also for the STI forum, the 10-member group of high-level representatives of scientific humanities, civil society, and private sector, they are one General Assembly mandated component of the technology facilitation mechanism. The STI forum, for which you're here today and the next few days, is another component. And the 10-member group has a very important role in co-organizing this forum. So it's a great pleasure to be able to have this discussion here, and thank you for taking the time out of your precious schedules. So let me introduce here in the room, I have Thierry Murray. She's the co-chair of the group. She's professor of physics and deputy director of research at Biosphere 2, University of Arizona in the USA. Anyone who's ever discussed sustainability science, I think will know what Biosphere 2 is. I don't need to introduce this. I have in the room here also Salome Gucciu, another member of the group. She is Principal Innovation and Outreach Officer in the Inter-University Council for East Africa. I hope I got this right. And I have also here with us in the room Talis Hiuna. He's a vice rector, he's a rector now for 2 weeks for research and professor at Riga Technical University in Latvia. He's also the chairman of the advisory board of the Latvian Council of Science. And I have online, I have just checked, I have Yong Long who is chair professor. Yes, thank you for putting on your camera at Xiamen University and distinguished professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And I also have online Mr. Carlos Enrique de Brito Cruz, also a very well-known figure in this area of discussion, a member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, senior vice president at Elsevier, and Professor Emeritus at the Physics Institute at the University of Campinas in Brazil. Thank you also for putting the video on. I'm not sure whether I missed someone on the call. Please shout and put on your video. Okay, good. So without further ado, let's first hear about the report, and let me hand over to Mrs. Shamika Sirmani, who of course is the Director of the Technology and Logistics Division at UNCTAD, which is in charge of this fantastic report. Over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, distinguished 10 member group members, and very good to have you here. So I will quickly take you through the report and the key findings, but I also would like to take this opportunity to pick your brains, because we need to know, one, we want to know, I mean, when you present the recommendations, I mean, how do we take these recommendations forward? And there's a lot of recommendations about international cooperation, solidarity, relaxing international rules in trade and intellectual property rights, you know, so how do we take these recommendations forward? So that's the first question. And the second, I would like you to pick your brain on the next report, because we are now preparing, you know, because this report comes every 2 years. So the next report will be in 2025, beginning of 2025. We are already looking, so this is, to me, is also a bit of a brainstorm. I'm picking your great brains from the distinguished 10 member group members. So let me take you through quickly the main findings of the report. If I can click this. Okay. So as Alex, you said, we are at the beginning of a new technological wave. Every country is almost at the same position to establish themselves as leaders of new sectors, because it's the beginning. But as you all know, in any situation of a technological wave, the early adopters move ahead, and then it's very difficult for others to follow, especially the digital technologies, where there's some sort of increasing returns to scale and network effects. You know, there are things, these technologies are very monopolistic by nature. So you move in and you have the first mover's advantage. And we also studied for this report, you know, other technological waves, and we also found at the beginning, everybody starts together, but then if you are not picking up, you know, taking the opportunities, you are left behind. So this is what we want to bring to you. And here is just a graph to show you the great divide, rise in carbon, CO2 per capita, and waves of technological change. And you can see they are all moving in tandem. So the second point is that we have looked at several of these technologies. We have an estimate. We have estimated.
Can we move the room view somehow?
Yes.
Yeah, because we can't see the plots.
If I can click this thing too.
Ah.
I think maybe I have to do it there, right?
Yeah, there's just a small delay.
Might be easier.
Maybe a second one.
Yeah.
No, the early one. Okay. So what we also did was to estimate the size of these technologies. So we look at the 17 frontier technologies, and some of them are the green technologies, but largely frontier technologies, AI, Internet of Things, electric vehicles, and you see the list of technologies there. And we see that they are moving really fast, and they represent about 1.5 trillion US dollar market today, probably also underestimated, because there's nobody's really, estimating these things properly. But the scary thing is which can grow to over 9.5 trillion by 2030. So 1.5 trillion today to 9.5 trillion by 2030. Yeah? The time is, So of course, together, these technologies also create jobs, destroys jobs, expand trade. But so far, maybe the next one. So far, it's the developed economies that are seizing most of these opportunities. If you look at the left-hand graph there, it starts in the 2018. You can see developing countries and developed countries, they have the similar export structures. It's about the 57 billion in trade for developed countries, and the trade for developing countries is about $57 billion. But you can see by 2021, it has widened. The gap has widened. And here, the developing countries also include China. So it's given also China is there. You can see by 2021, the gap has widened. Exports, these are all the exports. And of course, we all know there is also considerable inequality when it comes to R&D outputs, the patents, and basically who owns the technologies. And it's basically a two-country story. It's the US and China. And these countries account for about 60% of total patents and over 30% of total publications between 2000 and 2021 in this technology. So it's very much a two-country story. Thank you, Shaolan. Just also let me say that Shaolan has inspired much of the work that we began in this report, because it was one of your papers that really started us to say, okay, now let's see what is in it for developing countries in this green technological way. So thank you so much for being here. So, and one of the things we also did was to look at the readiness. It's like how ready developing countries, and we look at the ICT, the skills, the R&D, the industrial capabilities, and the finance. We have a massive amount of data, and look at this for 166 countries, and you can see they're pretty much, I don't know, I think, yeah, you can see a bit. Of course, at the top is the US, and it's the Sweden, Singapore, Switzerland, and so forth, and then you have the second half. We have countries in BRICS. The Russian Federation is ranked at 31, China at 35, Brazil at 40, India 46, and South Africa at 56. And much of the LDCs, of course, they are at the very, very bottom end of this index. So this is a concern. One of the things that we also see is that some countries have taken deliberate measures, policy measures. So they are doing much better than what their per capita income would say. And India is one of those countries, way, way ahead, punching way ahead of the weight grade, and the Philippines, Vietnam. So they have done things. They have created the opportunities. They have created the enabling environment for these frontier technology to flourish. So it's not like, okay, if we don't have the endowments, we just sit there and the technology will bypass us. It's not that. It's just the deliberate efforts can change. So the next one. So what we did, we look at three areas. We first look at the developing and using renewable energy technologies, and then we look at the greening traditional global value chains, and where are the opportunities for developing countries and how they can, materialize. And then, of course, the diversification towards production sectors that are more complex and greener. So here, I think my colleague Clovis is on the he's connected.
Just seen
he is the team leader for this report, and just want to say thank you, because this was a massive amount of data work and massive amount gathering of experience was done for this report. So first one, let me take you through a bit of, I think there are whole chapters on this topic. So let me look at the renewable energy. So what we see is that we look at the endowments, preconditions at the very top. You see the preconditions, and then we look at the responses of countries. Yeah, sometimes, yes, preconditions are not good, but if you respond, if the government takes actions to invest in critical sectors and provide R&D, develop skills, they can create the conditions that can, make things work for you. So we have the things like the wind, the readiness and the responses are good. For example, we look at China, the solar PV, biomass, bioethanol for Brazil. There were preconditions, and also the responses were good. So they captured markets, and hydrogen, perhaps Chile potentially. And then we look at the windows to be open. This is the solar PV, for example, in India. The readiness is there. The government responses were not following as well, but they are moving into these things. Biogas in Bangladesh is an example, so there are other. And then we look at the windows within reach. This is the biomass in Thailand, hydrogen in Namibia, and then we also look at the windows in the distance, because there are little readiness and also little strategic responses. So Sherry, we were just talking, how much governments can do, because I know that there was a whole gamut, the government should back off, and this is all private sector, let private sector do it. It's business, government should sit back, and I don't think it's going to work if you're going to capture the benefits of a technological revolution, and that's what's very clearly coming in this report. The governments as MA have a huge role to play. It is about the policy. It's about creating infrastructure, ICT, for example. I mean, these are largely ICT. This is a digital technological revolution. So if you don't have the skills, and who's going to build the skills? It's not the private sector, it's the governments again. And who's going to regulate? It's the governments again. So unless the government comes and also create demand, we have seen in countries, in China, they create demand. They said, okay, you need to buy a certain amount of your electricity from renewable. So that just creates the demand for these products. So there's massive things that the governments can do, and that's what is, you see examples after examples that the governments can influence both preconditions and responses and also demand. So this is very clear. And then next one there, so when the next one, we look at the greening of the traditional global value chains, and we look at two ways. Either you use green technologies like renewable energy in production processes, or you use digital technologies for smart manufacturing. So we look at the two, how the global value chain can go green. And we look at the smart technologies. We are talking about the capturing data using online connected sensors, meaning the Internet of Things, and smart manufacturing, because we know it consumes less energy. And we also then look at how the voluntary sustainability standard can help to upgrade value chains, and how the multinational companies also have a responsibility to support the downstream value chains to go green. So these are several the topics that we looked at. So the next one is the hard one, which is about the diversifying towards production sectors that are more complex and more greener. And this needs a lot more work for developing countries. It's not an easy field to just barge in. What we have said in the report is that the developing countries must identify and create their own paths to diversify towards more complex systems. But this is, of course, we recognize this is not an easy thing for development, say, for example, least developed country to do. So what we also did was that we have produced indices of economic complexity and carbon footprints for around 43,000 products exported in international markets. And we identified where the potential could be. And this could be a great tool for many countries to look into, and to see where they can, create forward and backward linkages. Maybe there are certain industries that you can walk into. And I want to thank my colleague Clovis again for painstaking effort to put these 43,000 products, and I recognize them as how green they are and how complex they are, and what are the opportunities for developing countries. There's a whole report that we have created, and perhaps I think maybe one of the things we should also do is to take it to countries, like a lot more conversation around these sectors, because this is a massive work that's already done. It's just reflected in a couple of pages in the report, but there's a massive report done for this. So now then, what we need to do, of course, the national policies, as I said, I think just before we started, we were talking about the systems approach and how the governments should work together. So, of course, the message is that we see when the environmental and industrial policies are done together, when there's a whole of government approach, and there's a vision at a, at a very high level of political level, things happen. We have, we do this massive platform of digitalizing trade procedures and processes, and we bring this very complex. UNCTAD has a program called ASICUDA. We bring this very complex and very sophisticated digital platforms, and we sit there and develop these digital platforms, adapt them to countries' needs. We build capacity. We then give the source code, and it works only when there's political leadership. And they work in Rwanda because the president himself has said we want to go digital. So, saying about the direction towards green technologies and innovation, this how the whole of government approach and aligning environmental industrial policies and so forth. And we also talk about the building green productive and innovation capabilities, and talk about the awareness building for green technologies and developing digital infrastructure and skills. And these are all responsibilities for government. And I think unless the governments have set the enabling environment, the private sector in developing countries will not venture, especially into these new areas of innovation and technologies. This is what we see. And you go to the banks, and bankers would rather give loans to open a retail shop than to start, for startup companies run by some young people, to do something green. So enabling environment is definitely the government's responsibility. Now, the last part of this conversation is about the international cooperation. And in fact, in regard to green, I think we should not even talk about international cooperation. We should talk about international solidarity, because this is it's not like, oh, you support us and we do something. No, at least we do things together if we want to survive as a species. So it's that kind of a conversation we need to have. And in the report, we talk about the cooperation through international trade and the intellectual property rights. Basically, how do we address the defective multilateral systems so that the developing countries can benefit from green technologies. And in fact, we have looked at the Paris Agreement, for example, the landmark Paris Agreement. It has beautifully laid out the need for technology transfer, need for flexible intellectual property rights. But you go to trade agreements and they don't even, like Paris Agreement did not happen. So it's almost like the Environment Ministry went to Paris and negotiated the Paris Agreement, and those who go to negotiate to Geneva, the WTO and the Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, they haven't seen this memo. The memo has not gone from the Environment Ministry to Trade Ministry. So we need to work together. So we have several areas we have identified where the intellectual property rights should be flexible. Can we have a COVID-19 kind of a clause for the green technologies too? Can we have a possibility subsidies to be okay at the WTO when it is green technologies? So things of that sort. And we talk about the partners for green technology, and we look at the regional and South-South cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. One of the things we see in the report is when it comes to developing countries, there are not many regional cooperation efforts successful. I mean, they have begun, and then they peters out for some reason. Is that the regional aspects are not coming through, unless, of course, if you're talking about the European Union. And there you see very powerful regional science and R&D activities. So we also talk about the Multilateral Challenge Fund for innovations for our common future. So there are a series of things that the report talks about when it comes to the international solidarity. So the last I want to say that yes, the technologies are already here. These technologies exist for greening our world and surviving, saving our species together. But we say the political will is needed to advance in the sustainable development of developing countries. And our concern that we have raised in the report is that developing countries should catch the green technology revolution early. Otherwise, it will yet again bypass, many countries and many people. And we have seen this in 1960s. there was another green revolution went through, Asia, and it took Asia out of famines that came every few years, but it totally bypassed Africa, that green revolution of 1960s. And I don't think we can afford to let this go, because this is an existential issue. It's also attached to this. This is not about trade and investment. It's much bigger. So thank you, and that's it. And I hope that you will read the report and also help us to take the message, and also let us know what should we do next. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shamika, and especially those last few words. There's really something big happening, and we better make sure we understand what it is and how to make this a force for good across the world. So let me now turn to the 10-member group. There's also 2 members who just joined a little late. I had an introduction before, so let me just highlight. So we have in the room as well Mrs. Karisha Abdul Karim, who is Associate Scientific Director of CAPRISA in South Africa, also a professor at Columbia University, UNAIDS Special Ambassador, and the list goes on and on. I don't think I have to.
And my apologies for joining late. We underestimated security and all the
No worries. And Shulan Fu, as just immediately pointed out by Shamika, she's a former 10 member, actually, a professor at University of Oxford, and the director and founder of the Technology Management Center for Development there. And I think she's a great example of how you, as the present 10-member group, also can consider being involved in this report or other UN activities in an area where you're interested. And Shalane is a good example. She worked on papers and a science policy brief with colleagues from other universities on this green windows of opportunity. And here we are today, and we have this report, and it has a much wider reach. So if you're interested, please do so. But let me go to the 10 members. So I wonder, Yong Long, he was the first one to accept the invitation to this group. Can we give you a chance to say a few words? How could we take this recommendation forward? What did you like? What other themes, areas should UNCTAD look at in the coming years and so on? And anything that comes to your mind.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I couldn't be with you. I wish I could, and probably next time, as Alex said, that even as the past former member, we can still participate in the actions program. I think this is a great program, even though I had a very quick look at the report. I think it's very comprehensive. And I also saw that you take United States and China mostly as for the comparison. That's China, of course, as the emerging economy, has done a great in applying green technology. Of course, this is not only the political will. I think it's your final in the final page, you say for the developing countries that need the political will. I think in China, it's not only from the top leaders, but also from the bottom up, from the grassroots. I think the motivation from the grassroots for the innovation is most important. And once you set up the policy for the transformation, so the enterprises and individuals, especially at the bottom level, they have to make changes. They have to, to use the appropriate technology. And I don't see any word in the report. You mostly talk about the frontiers technology. I don't think the frontiers technology mostly really fit in well for the developing countries, right? Frontiers technology, to some extent, you need a very costly, and so sometimes for the developing countries, if they really use frontiers technology, they may need to pay more for that. So how can we develop some kind of appropriate technology? That'd be more important, I think, especially for the developing countries. This is the first thing I would like to emphasize. The second one, the first one is the motivation from the grassroots, and plus the political will. The second one, of course, appropriate technology for the developing countries. And the third one, and this I think is the experience from China, that we take the so-called key industry sectors. We identify some key industry sectors like steel, as you say, and coal industry, and also some others, right? Like cement, right? You probably know that with the rapid urbanization in China, we use a lot of cement. And how can we find alternative and technology to apply less of this kind of the materials? And so how can we identify the key industrial sectors to make the transformation and to find the appropriate technology for doing that? The fourth one is also very important, that how can we develop green technology at the same time to prevent the emission of carbon dioxide and emerging pollutants, right? So once you develop some kind of the green technology, you need to consider the emissions. The emissions, not only the carbon dioxide, but also emerging pollutants, even metals, right? So these should all be considered. So it's very important to, especially to set up the policies and how, or even laws and regulations, right? And seems to me, the laws and regulations is more mandatory than the policy for the innovation or for the transformation to the green technology. I think this is my general remark. Alex, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
So thank you so much for those observations. I think they all good food for thought. I'm cognizant of the time a little because some of the team members will want to go to the STI in Africa Day very soon. So I wonder, and if you want to, you can raise your hand as well. You know, you would tell us.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, it was really useful report, and it also allows to draw some kind of new understanding of how these technologies can be transformed into the use. So, for example, I like the picture about maturity of frontier technologies, and obviously you can pick which technology you should use in order to make it more quicker to the market. So it's very straightforward. For me, I think something which would be very useful in, let's say, in the next report, to go into more details in terms what kind of programs are being used, because devil is in details. You know, for example, if you look at the investments of government into the R&D, as a general, I think there is a correlation between more money you put, more output you will expect. But then the question is, you know, what kind of programs you are actually offering? Because it could be at the early stage, it could be at the technology transfer, it could be at the investment stage. So maybe to have a little bit more view, what are the programs there? And from there you can draw maybe more even elaborate understanding, you know, what works, what doesn't work. So, and the second is that I think it's important also to emphasize on when you talk about policy regulations, many of technologies are really limited by very practical things, like, for example, the tender procedure. You know, how to, at the company, I'm also sitting at the water company at the board, and I know that we have a lot of restrictions. We cannot, for example, come up with some innovative solutions because they are just more expensive. So, and this is, I think, very limiting to, let's say, new technologies going into the market. So it's not because, you know, companies do not want to do that. I mean, I'm talking about government derived companies, but because they have the limitations in adapting the new technology. So I think something about the way the the technologies are purchased. You know, the way the tender procedures are organized should be also a very important point in order to push new technologies into the market. But otherwise, I think it's a very great report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Talis. Indeed, the devil is in the detail. What is great in my view on this report is also that it's very empirical. It really makes full use of trade data and doesn't just spin a narrative, as is sometimes the case in these kinds of flagship publications. So
can
yes,
I,
Chair, please, absolutely.
Right off of Tullis, I agree. This is a very comprehensive, and I really enjoyed getting into the details of this report. I think it's excellent, and all of the products and the greenness of products and the readiness of economies. One thing that I saw was missing, which is relevant to what Tallis just said, which is what kind of programs the governments decide from basic research all the way to the valley of death to create a prototype. And then there's another valley of death to actually scale up. And the government has to think about all of these things in a systems view. You can't do anything if you don't have the basic research. And that isn't mentioned in the reports. For the next report, I will comment that there is basic research that is relevant to new. And if the government focuses on call use inspired basic research, Pasteur's quadrant in the Stokes, and then thinks about what do you do with, so that creates the pool of talent who can think creatively, and you need that. You need that for industry. Most of these people end up going into industry. Basic research is one, and comprehensive government programs is another. The other very quick comment is for the funding mechanisms, how can the multilateral regime figure out that the funding that goes to certain countries is used for what it is meant to? I mean, this is complicated, so that's just my question. And that is completely relevant to philanthropists, for example. And maybe for the next report, you can think about what kind of regulations or governance could that be. But great report.
Thank you, Cherry. As you can see, Shamika taking notes. So everything you say is
already well recorded.
Karisha, please.
Thanks, Alex. And initially, when I was invited to join this meeting, I was like wondering, what am I doing here? This is out of my area of expertise. But I think as a citizen, I find it, and as a scientist, I mean, the rigor and robustness is unquestionable. So I have 3 comments. The first is the issue of solidarity. And it's interesting how this comes up across the board when we're talking about SDGs and we're talking about addressing inequalities. Solidarity requires trust. And I think that we don't have a lot of trust between countries and within countries. And we do talk about industry and we do talk about government leadership, but we also need to bring the public into this. As you mentioned, digital technologies and how that's now considered a basic human right, or should be considered, and resonated with me. Connectivity is everything, and there's no point in having these advances if we're not benefiting the people it's intended for, the most vulnerable, etc. So I just wanted to put the issue of solidarity and trust and public engagement, they're all interconnected. My second point is that I think when we look at this report, it's flawless, at least in my mind. But it's the context that we need to think about that. So it's not siloed, but that we take the polycrises that we're living into account. There's sort of, even, I hate the word post-COVID because we're not over COVID yet. We're still living with the virus, maybe at lower levels and close to endemicity, who knows. But even prior to COVID and the pandemic, we had all kinds of challenges and so on. And those have been exacerbated with the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable. So I think even when we talk about low-income countries, developing countries, we have to take that context into account. And we have to look at how do we position this so we're making a good investment case for both economic and social development, which is the key underpinnings of the SDGs. And my third issue is that I think we have the science and we have the technology. The thing that's going to leapfrog us is the innovation. And so I liked your comments about how do we innovate? and then that globally we have a great plan, but locally, how do we translate that in a meaningful way? Thank you.
Thank you, Carisha. Yeah, I would immediately wanted to ask Salome, because Carisha basically passed the ball on innovation. Here we have someone who has direct experience on the ground in Africa.
Let me first of all appreciate the highlights of this report, and it really captures a lot. And one of the things maybe I would say is a step forward would be actually to bring it further also to government, especially on this issue of a systems approach, because there has to be supportive environment for everything to really be adopted. And one of the things maybe I would like to highlight is probably as nations, they should be able, maybe should be encouraged also to take up a landscape analysis of these frontier technologies, so that to see how they can adapt with a focus on green technology, so that they can know, and also they can see how best they would be able to adopt these technologies within at their own settings, because there are actually opportunities for adoption, but with understanding on the ground what is happening, what are the regulations that are on the ground, what kind of research in terms of the basic research, applied research is happening on the ground, what kind of cooperations are there with specifics on green technology. There is actually an opportunity to see now what next, which will be specific also to nations applying the global recommendations from this report. And that's my input on this. But good job. It's a report that is having very good recommendations.
Thank you, Salome. Did you have something directly? Because I have online, of course, Brito, who has been waiting for a long time. Directly on this? Or?
Yes, I wanted to comment based on this. First of all, I'm Diana. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm the head of research and sustainability for the Global Blockchain Business Council. We're the largest member association focused on blockchain and digital assets. And one of the things that we look at is basically the climate crisis disproportionately affecting vulnerable and marginalized communities where the environmental and social issues are very interrelated. We really look at the importance of transparency of data, the role of the Global South, and also tokenization. The issues of transparency of data are very aligned with the role of trust, like you had mentioned. And mostly what I want to say is, through collaborative technologies, how are we really thinking through the role of institutions as well as individuals from a peer-to-peer basis to be able to create those networks of collaboration instead of so much competition. And we have many examples with decentralized energy systems and the need for a supportive environment. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, and the role of collaboration through open data.
Thank you. I think very relevant perspective here as well. So, Brito, you've been waiting very patiently for a long time.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's a great opportunity. I want to congratulate the authors for the report, which is extremely interesting and strongly data-based. So it makes good reading and allows the reader to have questions and hypotheses. And I have one question, one comment. The comment is that I completely agree that research collaboration would be or is extremely relevant to make those developments faster. And as we are seeing in this forum, one important driver for research collaborations could be obtained from the initiatives taken by research funders worldwide. We are going to have in the next 2 days two interesting sessions involving large research funders across the world, talking about how they might be able to better collaborate to advance the SDGs. So that was my comment. My question is, I was curious about that table that had a ranking for year 2021 and 2022. And my curiosity was piqued on why is that China fell from rank 25 to 35 in 1 year, considering that their expenditure and effort in renewable energy is enormous. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts about that. Thank you very much. It's on page 30, I think, the ranking.
Yeah. Thank you, Brito. Do you want to respond to this or ask Clovis on the?
Maybe we get the last, maybe we have the last say really quickly. Maybe Sharon wants to say something.
Yes, so Sharon, if you want to say something, you can.
I'm coming here to listen to and feedbacks and the discussions, really learning from everyone. Yeah, so I told Alex before.
Yeah, because you've been intimately involved in this report already. So anyway, so I have questions online as well. So just tell me whether you want to respond to this or
maybe we get everything and we'll have one round of responses.
So I know that it's almost 10 o'clock and some members here will want to run off for the Africa Day. So if you have to, that is fine, but I think we can still take a few minutes. Those of you who can stay, let's say take another 5-6 minutes, right, to go at least through some of the questions. I have one in the chat and I have a few that were received beforehand. They all relate somehow to either some specific things or, like what does that mean, this report, for example, for agriculture, right? Other questions are, let me just summarize because there are too many. Another one is just, so how can we carry these recommendations forward together, North and South, to actually get back on track with the SDGs? And they even specify a date 2033 to 35. So probably presuming that by 2030, many of those aspirational goals may not have been met. There are questions here also on specifically on the climate questions and non-renewable resources and what their role in this can and should be, in terms of a systems view that we also have heard. There's also a question on space technologies. Did you include something on space technologies in this report, and what role would this have? Let me stop here. Maybe anyone who wants to comment on these questions and respond. Jerry, just
I'm off to Africa Day.
So just let me, I think we can go, we can also talk to the people who are asking the questions and have a conversation. So thank you so much. I think these are very, very important points that you raised. Just to talk about the index, because as you can see, some countries are going up in the index. Like Finland used to be 17, Finland is now 8. So there's some movement back and forth. I think China, I mean, when you look at the frontier technologies, we always say that it's a story of two countries, it's China, the US. But when we do the index, I think China is 35, not number 2, is because of the connectivity. It's the rural internet connectivity, because we are just looking at numbers, saying how connected the population is. It's there, that's where there some falling. But I mean, really, I mean, so it's that aspect. Some have done well in doing connectivity. I think it's largely you will see these numbers changing. I think the many of these points that you raised are very important. The systems approach, the trust, the solidarity issues, and I think many of you talk about the collaboration, the importance of collaborating, and the role of government. I think this is something that came again and again. The public sector has a big role to play, and the international community also needs to pitch in. I think this is the time, because many of these countries are not emitting. They are not destroying the earth. I think about 142 countries emits about 5% of the global emissions. They're accountable to only 5%. But if they have the opportunity to benefit from these technologies, and if they're ready to benefit, and that's what I was calling for international cooperation, but now international solidarity, I think it's the international community's responsibility to support the developing countries who are willing to embrace the frontier technologies and green technologies. And lastly, I think there was a question about why frontier technologies, because this is the technological revolution. I mean, this revolution this is our time's technological revolution, and it's not going to go away. And either we get ready or we miss out. And I think these technologies it's not just for one sector. I think there were questions about what will do the agriculture. Agriculture will be affected by frontier technologies. There's a lot of this precision agriculture is the way to go. And so these are general purpose. This is a general purpose technological revolution. It's not just it will affect all sectors. It will affect the education, the health, the agriculture, and you name it. It all will be affected. So how are we going to be ready to capture the benefits from these technologies is the conversation. And thank you so much for very good points that you raised. I have written down all of them. And we will be roping you in as we go and launch this report. I think this is something that we also like to do with you. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for organizing this session. And this is how we work. Desa and Anta. When we come together, we do really nice things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really want to thank those who left already, those who are on the call, those who worked on the report, and of course my friends at UNCTAD and the across the UN system that I hope we work together in the future really well and come up with great new ideas and reports. So.
Thanks.
A last word just on those people on the call. I know there's quite a few who are on the call who provided science policy briefs for this forum. Please continue to try to do this also in coming years. We have some ideas on better engaging you, probably including future reports and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.